this cottage industry, there's a huge gap. If we can somehow unleash that talent and that skill set on the Indian market and the world market, I think we could have a very interesting business. So that's one answer. My other, if I can just one more point. 10 years, 12, 15 years ago, what young men wore as a brand on their shirt was what defined them. That's what they would show off about. Often it was a Provogue shirt, but that's changed. Young people today don't care. They care much less about brands on the shirt. They care about this. Which phone are they carrying? Or which car are they driving in? Those are the status symbols today. But we don't make any of these in India. And we could make them in India. So to answer your question, we need to make what Indian consumers need. And we need to make what the world needs. And we need to keep our heritage of manufacturing, but we need to move on and make things that people need in this country and abroad, and put our heads together to figure out what that is. This is one example. And we need to make 10 times more of it. And then the government policies will be realized, when the jobs will be created and all the boats will float, and everybody, the whole country will become better off.
Sanjeev, your perspective on what role can India play in pharmaceutical manufacturing?
I think to this extent, maybe this is one of those industries which is a little more advanced than other industries, because it accepted newer technology, it accepted challenge, it accepted what was happening. And therefore, to a very good extent, it started to corner itself into glory by saying it's pharmacy of the world because of the low cost of manufacturing. And for example, if we have a $15 billion domestic market, we actually export $15 billion of pharmaceuticals also. And when we export $15 billion of pharmaceuticals, we also are exporting to countries, for example, the United States, whose budget, 21% of their budget is healthcare by 2020. And therefore, the amount of savings the US government derives because they import from India is substantial. 1 out of every 3 tablets sold in the US is basically manufactured in India. So therefore, there is a lot of advancement that has been done. But there have been fallouts in the process. And certain things that are happening, fallouts have been, for example, API manufacturing. API manufacturing started dying with competition from China. And basically because we ended up doing a regressive price control program in India on pharmaceuticals by reducing incentivization for people to manufacture, even if it was the cheapest thing in the world, and therefore making it more amenable to competition from China with a lot of subsidies going around with the Chinese government. So some of those things, if we are able to manage well, we can continue to grow in this area and become substantially larger. The second thing we need to understand is that slowly as medicine changes and the research changes, we cannot keep on talking about the old world traditional method of manufacturing, and we need to graduate into better manufacturing processes. Many of the failures in India in manufacturing have been more related to process or to equipment rather than capability. So that's something to understand, that in many cases it is the capability gap that sometimes troubles us, but here it is either the process gap or it is the equipment gap that sometimes we do. So how do we create a proper environment around manufacturing in India for pharmaceuticals is going to define it. And everybody has to participate. You talked about Make in India. I think we are amongst the first companies to really respond to it as a multinational. We are already putting up a major manufacturing plant for our baby products near Hyderabad. Major plant, which will be our biggest plant in Asia Pacific in our consumer products. We already have in pharmaceuticals decided to manufacture for global requirement tablets in India for a major disease area through a CRAMS manufacturer, through special economic zones or export oriented unit zones near Bangalore. So we are trying to take advantage of the whole enthusiasm around India right now to do it. But it's about participation, that our company is ready to take the risk today, thinking that tomorrow will be better. And that's something that will help pharmaceuticals much more.
Thank you. Mark, I'll come to you before we talk about government support. So aerospace is a sunrise manufacturing sector in India in many ways. And with the government now inviting 49% FDI, where do you think aerospace manufacturing in India can play a role in the global aerospace manufacturing value chain?
Well, I think in the shorter term, I think the bigger opportunity is actually civil aerospace. I'll come back to the FDI. But if you look at civil aerospace as in total, you know, there's very, very large order books exist for Boeing, for Airbus, the engine manufacturers, GE, Rolls-Royce. The Rolls-Royce order book alone is something like £70 billion that we've got secured orders, and that's on the back of the aerospace growth. India, I think, is forecast to grow at something like 9% per annum for the next 10 years in terms of the aerospace industry. So I think short term, it's all about civil aerospace. So all these big order books that the OEMs have got, I would say the majority of that manufacturing is still done in the traditional developed countries, so the US, the UK, Europe, Japan. And I think, as we heard from the speaker from Boeing, we all demand more for less, right? We don't expect to pay more for our airplane tickets. We don't expect that to go up. And really that's sort of driving the industry to really reduce cost. So the real opportunity from an India point of view is you know, how does it deliver, how can it make parts for the aerospace industry at a lower cost? And that is, you know, that's front and center about what the OEMs are looking for. I think India, in terms of a USP, a couple of things that sort of go with that. You know, from an aerospace manufacturing point of view, clearly you need a strong engineering base to support that. And India's got a very, very well developed pool of engineers that have got aerospace experience through a lot of the design and engineering houses that have been here for some time. So that obviously offers the opportunity to marry that engineering expertise with the manufacturing capability. So I think that's so certainly cost and the USP, I think, is that sort of engineering side. The other observation I suppose I would make, I think in terms of aerospace manufacturing, in many cases there's a level of technology transfer, and I think there's you know, when people think about doing business in India, they don't think about IP issues in the way that you would in terms of going to China. So I think the whole business relationships that you can establish here, I think people are much more comfortable about doing things in the long term. There's a lot more trust, and they feel there's a lot more transparency in terms of how we can conduct business on a long-term basis.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Dr. Singla, you know, all these aspirations around Make in India require tremendous government support. Maybe you want to just sort of outline what have been the recent initiatives that the government has taken to support the Make in India initiative.
Thank you, Manish. You see, Make in India concept is absolutely imperative in today's context, when we have to increase the employment opportunity, when we have to increase the value addition in the country. And for doing that, in the foreign trade policy, we have got number of the schemes wherein we encourage the manufacturers to set up the base in India for exports as well as for domestic market. To list out the few, we have got a scheme known as Export Promotion Capital Goods Scheme. Under this scheme, we permit a person to import capital goods without payment of any duty for setting up a manufacturing base in the country. Of course, you have to take a certain amount of export obligation, that is whatever is the custom duty saved. 6 times of that you have to export, but that you get 6 year times for doing that. But while doing so, Tim mentioned a very important point, that you have to manufacture a product not only for the international market, but for the domestic market as well. So these capital goods which you import under the Export Promotion Capital Goods Scheme, while making it for use for your international market, simultaneously you can use this for the production in the domestic market as well, as so long as you are completing the stipulated export obligation. Then this is for capital goods. Similarly, for enabling you to get the raw materials at a competitive cost to compete internationally, we have got scheme known as Advanced Authorization Scheme, wherein you could import all your raw materials without payment of any duty for your exports. And specifically for manufacturing in India, we have got a scheme known as Deemed Export Scheme. This is particularly for encouraging value addition and manufacturing in the country. And how does it operate? I mentioned about the export promotion capital goods scheme, that you can import capital goods without payment of any duty. But if I have got that EPCG authorization for importing capital goods, instead of importing, I want to take the same product from the BHEL, then the BHEL would be unable to supply this capital goods to me without payment of any excise duty. Whatever duties they incur on the inputs, those duties are given back by the government in the form of duty drawback. Whatever inputs they want to import for making that capital goods, they can import without payment of duty. That means those products which instead of importing, we enable them to be manufactured in the India, and to make manufacturer competitive, we enable them to have the inputs without payment of duty, we relieve them of excise duty. The deemed export scheme. Similarly, we have got very special scheme, focus product scheme, focus market scheme. Those are the kind of scheme wherein for going on those specified markets, say Latin American countries or other countries, we give you a certain kind of benefits, extra duty free scripts. Similarly for certain specified products also. In this context, I would also like to discuss about Sanjeev mentioned about special economic zone, he mentioned about EOU scheme. So like either at present or maybe in the next round, I can mention something about those schemes as well.
Sure, thanks. So, coming back to our sort of core theme around operational excellence, and Sanjeev, let me come to you. I think one dimension of operational excellence is quality, and I don't think we can ever underemphasize importance of quality in a pharma context. And recently, we've sort of Indian pharma manufacturing has been exposed to bad press coverage, adverse press coverage, primarily driven by suboptimal manufacturing practices. So where do you think the gaps are, and what should be the roadmap going forward to ensure that Indian pharma manufacturing is amongst the best or is world class?
This is very important, and everybody needs to understand this in the right context, and why this happens and how this happens, and why we should not land up with what we have we landed up with. First of all, if you look at all the observations that US FDA has raised, first basic fact is that outside United States, the maximum approved US FDA plants are in India. So therefore, being uniquely poised in numbers, you obviously are going to get more inspections. And US with no inspectors on the ground and now have about 15 or 16 inspectors in India. So they are going to inspect because those are consumed by their citizens. So that's a fact of life. Second, if you want to export to these kind of countries who have very, very organized systems, then your system should be equivalent to what they need. One cannot say that whatever I produce, you should accept, or whatever I do, you should accept. That's not going to work anymore. And as we went along with the opportunity in a very, very rapid fashion, somewhere down the line we forgot to catch up on our processes and the way we manufacture our goods. And that led to process gaps. And most of the observations are not so much on the actual quality, for example, of the tablet, but on the way if it has to be tracked down on documentation. Are you buying raw material from the right people? Are you checking everything? Are you maintaining your test records well? Are you really testing everything that is required? Now, in some places it might have been done, but there was no documentation. In certain cases, documentation is not there, so there is reason to suspect. So some of these gaps are no longer can be tolerated, especially in health. And the same set of rules should apply whether it is to an Indian patient or to an American patient or a German patient or any other patient in this world, or even a Rwanda patient. Ultimately, it's about health. So this is something which we need to understand. And those gaps led to an immediate impact on the huge growth story of pharmaceuticals of the Indian manufacturers who, and you must know that some of these companies, for example, if you take Sun Pharma or Dr. Reddy's, 75% of their business is exports, 25% of their business is domestic business. So their dependency on the export business is that much higher, and therefore they will be under intense scrutiny from these countries. So the gaps are basically on those times. Why this happens is, I explained one thing, but the second thing is also that we need to get out of this domestic protection of industry. Because what it does, it doesn't allow us to get latest technology into the country and upgrade our skills and upgrade what we do. Unless we open up completely, we are not going to do that. So it's not so prevalent in pharmaceuticals, though it came to a stage where brownfield investment started getting questioned and started getting, under were left from automatic route for some time, and all kinds of things happened. But ultimate impact is so and so, that ultimately you will lose out on business, competitiveness, on prosperity, on economic development, and ultimately health of the nation. There is an economic burden of health for every country. For example, the biggest economic burden that this country is going to face is not something else but cardiovascular and diabetes, which is going to be the biggest productivity dropper of this country, and not any skill. So when you understand these things in that light, you need to ensure that all that you do has to be of top class quality. And these inspections that are happening are good for us. All these lacunas that are being found are good for us. Let's accept it. And most of the manufacturers whom I have interacted with, or the owners of these companies, have taken it very positively. They have said, fine, it will help us improve and become better companies. In the meanwhile, we will suffer to some pain, but that's inevitable and that we should. And the government also is trying to take a little more positive attitude towards it, saying that, look, if you don't do something right, we cannot support you. It's not right for us to support something which is incorrect. So this all is going on in the background. It's going to benefit us. The churn is very useful. This Manthan is very useful for the country. But it's not that serious as much as sometimes media makes it out to be. I think let's also understand that controversy is the hallmark of selling a newspaper or television spot, but it's not so much as you read, while people are very, very responsible in this industry.
Okay, thank you. Tim, let me just come back to a more sort of overarching question. We talk of operational excellence, which invariably means reducing cost, improving labor productivity, so on and so forth. But on the other hand, we also talk of sustainable manufacturing, green manufacturing. So how does the industry balance these two? Can they go hand in hand?
Thanks, Manish. I'd just like to take an example of what was just said into the textile industry. It's exactly the same as pharmaceutical, exactly the same story. High import barriers, protectionism, resulting in complacency, let me call it that. Complacency on quality, complacency on consistency, which means we're not globally competitive. Yet, we have the skills and the manpower and the knowledge to make the best fabrics and the best garments in the world, but we don't. We could do. So definitely I agree that openness of markets, let the imports come in, let everybody rise to the challenge. So I totally agree with that point. To your other point, well, I worked before this life. I spent about 5 years in a sustainable business model in the United States. The whole business was around sustainability, and sustainability for me is a very complicated word. It's to complete, birth to a complete cycle to enable, and it's not, and you can't achieve perfection. It just doesn't exist. Right? If that's, you're talking about green revolution, right? Now, the challenge with India is, I think 7 of the top 20 polluting cities in the world today are Indian. We have a terrible track record, appalling at this. And in fairness, the challenges that this country faces right now are so severe. Even at the summit with Obama last week, it went on the agenda But it was very difficult for the Americans to make progress in this area, even with the Prime Minister. So I think we've got to recognize across this industry, our manufacturing industry, we have so many challenges that for business owners and management to get their head around this at the same time, we can't expect them to give it today a lot of lip service, in my opinion. We've got to get across a lot more challenges first. Even in the West, even in the developed economies, despite a lot of lip service, it's coming, but it's taken 10, 15 years for people to start to take notice and to start to do something, if we're really honest about it. Right? So, of course, you can seek efficiencies through green practices. Of course, sustainability is the right thing to do, but it's going to take time for us in this country to make progress, if I'm really honest, I think. Yeah. And I think the government has to help here. I think the government has to help and encourage us to really take this seriously. Of course, it's important. I'm just looking at the hierarchy of things that have to be done in this country. And of course, it's important, but I'd say give it a few more years before it becomes top of anybody's agenda.
Okay. Mark, so we coming back to aerospace manufacturing. If you look at the industry, it's an industry which is sort of it's sort of global. You do have a global footprint, and at the same time, it's also very concentrated in the fact that the major hubs are just a few. So as sort of it becomes a sunrise industry in India, what role how do you see this industry emerging in India? What role can we play? What parts of the supply chain can we play in? What can be our competitive advantage in this industry? And how can India create a future for itself in the aerospace manufacturing?
Yeah, okay. And I think the broader challenge, I think, that the big aerospace OEMs see is how do you develop the sort of SMEs in India. Most of the big OEMs, I think, are starting to make their presence felt here, either through a JV, as we have for Rolls-Royce. You have Sikorsky with another joint venture here. So the bigger players are coming in and starting to create their own sort of manufacturing footprint here. But for aerospace to really take off, then we really need to develop the broader supply chain in India and help those sort of SME companies transition possibly from what they do in the automotive industry into aerospace. And getting into aerospace, it is a challenge. I mean, there are challenges in terms of having your quality management system certified to the right standard. When you get an order from an aerospace company, you've got to go through all the first article inspections. You've got to get their approval. So you're probably looking at something like 18 months to 2 years if you're getting into aerospace as a sort of first entrant. And so I think, as OEMs, I think we've got to help suppliers make that journey. So I think we've got to make sure we give them the right coaching, the right support, the right advice, so they can work their way through that. But I mean, ultimately, from an operational excellence point of view, from an aerospace, while we're looking for cost, absolutely it's all about quality. Absolutely it's all about delivery. Those are sort of fundamentals that the industry's got to be able to deliver. And I think, my sort of encouragement would be that, in order to do that, we need to make sure that people are investing in technology. We're competing on a global stage, right? So we can't just rely on the labor arbitrage that India's got. We've got to invest in the right technology. We talked about the importing materials, the machinery, getting the duty exemption, which we've taken advantage of, right? So we've gone out and bought the best machine tools that we can, that our competitors are using. We've gone and invested in an IT system, right? So our ERP system integrates with our MES system. Okay, we've got a paperless shop floor. So everything is integrated. We're using technology to drive productivity. So I think the big challenges from aerospace. How do we help people to get over those sort of entry barriers? But really, we've got to make sure that the companies that are out there are investing in the right capability, because that's what you're going to need to be able to deliver on the cost, but really the quality, delivery, and safety. And if you know, if industry's not there, then they won't be able to compete.
So where do you see the weakest link today in this whole sort of operational excellence, you know, around quality, cost, safety? Where do you think is the weakest link today?
I think from what I've seen in terms of some of the suppliers that we've worked with, I probably think mostly are around the right first time. Yeah. So how do you do things right first time would be the key one for me.
Okay. Dr. Singla, coming back to you, I think you were wanting to sort of touch upon the SEZ policy framework.
Yeah, before I come to that, Sanjeev mentioned about one thing, and which was mentioned by Tim also, that we need to remove all the restrictions for the import, and so that the domestic protection is not there. I must place the facts clearly. You see, we have got a book which is known as Indian Trade Classification Harmonized System, which is published by the DGFT. It contains about 10,500 entries, and today out of 10,500, around 10,000 items are freely importable, and the restriction of the import is there on around 400 items, and that is only on the ground of, say, safety, security, environment, etc. Yes, I agree with you that there were restrictions earlier. We started removing this import restriction in 1997, and by 2003 we had done away with all those kind of things. Yes, wherever there is a legitimate protection required by the domestic industry, we do provide by way of anti-dumping mechanism, which is a quasi-judicial process wherein we really establish that someone is dumping, that this is causing injury to the domestic market, and there is a causal relationship between the injury and this thing, then only that kind of process is there. But otherwise, we are making a conscious attempt, we have made a conscious attempt that we free it up. And I must also admit that we are in the process of formulating 5-year foreign trade policy, and what further needs to be done for encouraging Make in India, we would be doing that also. And for enabling that to happen, I think Special Economic Zone scheme is a very important component of the entire framework. What it enables is that we have made a conscious attempt that we provide you a mechanism wherein all your needs are met at one place. We have put in place a single window mechanism. There is a unit approval committee headed by the development commissioner of that zone, wherein the representatives of the various departments, state governments are there, and we give you clearance. You are operating in that SEZ, you could keep on importing your raw material, whatever you want for your export, you keep on importing your capital goods, and you keep on exporting, and you don't have to give account of each and every consignment. Just at the end of the 5 years, you have to show that, yes, you are positive net foreign exchange earning cumulatively over a period of 5 years. And we have gone a long way from the export processing zone scheme to Special Economic Zone scheme, wherein we used to have the requirement of value addition for different products and those kind of things, just now positive NFE. So I think Special Economic Zone scheme, and you mentioned about the pharmaceutical, I could give the example of textiles, like one SEZ which is coming up in Andhra, that is Brandix, with an international investment which is going to set up an integrated facility for textiles, starting from A to Z, wherein all the facilities are available at one place. About the engineering also, and you mentioned about that the things keeps on changing. You mentioned about mobile. I would like to give the example that when the SEZ scheme started, Nokia, first time they started manufacturing these products in India, and from that SEZ they were exporting those products to more than 25 countries. We have got a Apache SEZ again in Andhra, wherein first time they started manufacturing Adidas shoes in country, and from there they are exporting to more than 25 countries. So this is one scheme which really enables manufacturers to come at one place. And specifically, you see, when the small exporter is coming for setting up small and medium enterprise, for them this is one scheme, because he doesn't have to go to various state governments for taking 20 permission, going to acquire land, and those kind of. He gets the place at one place, he gets all the clearances in a unit approval committee, and he can start operating. So I think we have taken a lot of steps in the foreign trade policy, Special Economic Zone scheme, EOO scheme, for enable this to happen. And I would be very happy to receive any suggestion which you might have for the new 5 5-year foreign trade policy for making this Make in India concept more acceptable.
Thank you.
One point I want to
Yeah.
specifically add to what Doctor said is very important. I think I've been in this business of trying to import and export for quite some time, pharmaceuticals, and I remember having in 90s, 30th April, we used to all wait for the policy book and the handbook of procedures. Yeah, it used to be so thick. Yeah, no longer it hardly exists, because I think there is a more stable policy, and that we must acknowledge. The work done by DGFT is outstanding in this area.
We have some plans for expansion, and we're looking at the SEZ